John Textor is unsuited for all aspects of football, which is why, as a rich American, he decided to go for the multi-ownership approach of football clubs across the globe. One of those clubs happens to be Olympique Lyonnais, who compete in the top tier of French football. Which means that as a bona fide John Textor hater, I promptly found myself 50 kilometers or so away to take over the manager job at AS Saint-Étienne, Lyon's primary rival, in order to make Textor's life in France resemble that of a rich aristocrat during the French Revolution. There's only one problem. Saint-Étienne got relegated to Ligue 2 last season. That does explain why getting this job was so easy. So, our goal this year is pretty simple. Get into one of the promotion spots for Ligue 2 and go back up to Ligue 1 next season. No ifs, ands, or buts. We'll gradually figure out the rest as we go, but the idea here is to eventually make John Textor's life miserable, and we can't exactly do that while being one division below Lyon.
Cool.
Right then, let's talk about the club I'll be managing for the foreseeable future. Association Sportive du Saint-Étienne Loire, abbreviated as ASSU and commonly known as Saint-Étienne, have been around since 1933 and were one of the French powerhouses in the 1960s and 1970s, but have fallen from grace in recent times. They're nicknamed Les Verts, meaning the Greens, due to their home colors, and along with an incredibly passionate fanbase, they also have arguably the coldest white boy in the game representing their colors on a global stage in Timothée Chalamet.
Et plus fort évidemment, c'est vert. On a bon public et les meilleurs supporters. On va gagner, ça c'est juré. Allez!
Now, being a complete creature of habit who is still exploring this whole new world of in and out of possession tactics in FM26, I ended up just basing my initial tactic around a 4-2-3-1 wing play, where the attacking center midfielder is a second striker that makes it kind of run like a 4-2-4, then shifting into a 4-3-3 with two defensive midfielders and the second striker turning into a pressing central midfielder during it. All in a neatly packaged, balanced mentality with a bunch of instructions in which I'll show off the screenshots here because explaining them will take time away from whatever memes and bits I've got to do for this whole thing. Although if this video gets 300 likes, I'll throw the link for the tactic download somewhere in the description. Also, a quick addendum to any French-speaking viewers who stumble into this. I am not very good with French pronunciations. Please know that I am trying to not completely butcher it, and I'll hopefully get somewhat better at this as I go, but if there's something I've got immensely wrong, and you've got either phonetic pronunciations of it or any helpful advice on how to improve, please drop them down in the comments. Thank you. Let me just get you back to the video. Thankfully, Saint-Étienne had a roster that looked more than ready to fight their way back to Ligue 1, including some standouts like stalwart goalkeeper and team captain Gauthier Lassonnet, defenders Dylan Batubinsika and Denis Apia, defensive midfielders Pierre Ecois and Florian Tadieu, attacking midfielders Augustin Boki, Zuriku Davitashvili and Igor Miladinovic, and finally, Belgian youngster Lucas Tassan at striker. Not to mention a few new arrivals prior to my own hiring like Maxime Bernauer, João Ferreira, Ebenezer Annan, and Irvin Cardona. Although, even with a fairly stacked roster, our squad planner did show that we could maybe shore up the attacking central midfielder and left back positions, which led me to grabbing attacking midfielder Jeremia Recoba on loan from Spanish side UD Las Palmas for the season to help with that depth, and we also got Henan Loji on trial. but he wanted too much money, so we bailed out of that very quickly.
Nah, I'm good.
It did not take long to see how overpowered Saint-Étienne was compared to their competition in Ligue 2, as we went unbeaten through the first 13 games of the season with 9 wins and 4 draws, with Stassan, Recoba and Cardona scoring the bulk of the goals during that run. The streak was undone by Troyes in early November, as we ended up losing 1-0 at their stadium on a late-game penalty kick. Although this unbeaten run upped my confidence in that the wing play style tactic I'd put together was up to the task to get us promoted. We'd also get a chance to show how effective it was even further in this season's edition of the Coupe de France. For those unfamiliar, the Coupe de France is the premier knockout cup competition in French football that happens every year, and it is open to all professional and amateur clubs across France, and also to clubs based in their overseas departments and territories. Which means that if the draws work out in mysterious ways, we could potentially face a football club based in the French Guiana, or Martinique, or even
Tahiti!
Our hopes to see what overseas France had to offer would not happen in the 7th round, which was where we entered. We got sorted against a fellow Ligue 2 side in Dunkerque instead. We beat them 3-1 without too much concern, dealt with AS Nancy in league play, and then actually got our exotic arc of this whole Coupe de France arc by being sorted against GFC Ajaccio in the 8th round of the Cup. And being the away club, that meant we got to travel to Corsica to play that round. It was an eventful trip, as we ended up winning a 4-2 barn burner against the Corsican side, and I finally got to see the sights of a region that's had my eye ever since I watched the noir anime series in the early 2000s.
It smells like a fucking weeb!
Being first by a mile and a half in December convinced the board of directors to make extra transfer funds available, which jumped our budget to $5 million on that front. We repaid their kindness by beating Dunkerque in our Ligue 2 matchup, drawing against Bastia in a frustrating 0-0 at home, and then taking out AS Fabrègues in the 9th round of the Coupe de France before ranking in the new year. In between those matches, I spent 1.4 million of the transfer budget on fullback Thiago Espinosa out of Racing Club in Argentina, while selling Dennis Apia over to Almeria in Spain for 300,000. Espinosa was younger, more versatile, and a player I think will be a solid contributor for the club over the next few years, so it was an easy decision to make. Espinosa would immediately get involved during his debut, as he assisted with Augustin Boisquet's first goal in a 4-1 thrashing of Le Mans in their own stadium. 4 goals in each match would be the norm throughout most of January, as we ended up doing the same in games against Clermont and Bologna, along with beating Grenoble 4-1 in the 10th round of the Coupe de France, with Irvin Cardona getting a brace in the game. The win against Grenoble in the Cup would provide our biggest challenge yet for the 11th round. A clash against Ligue 1 side Le Havre AC, who had escaped relegation last season by the skin of their teeth and were in the relegation battle yet again this season. And in our clash against them in early February, it would yet again be Irvin Cardona who would be the man of the match, scoring the only goal of the entire game and ensuring the upset 1-0 victory for Saint-Étienne at Stade Océan. This would put us into the quarterfinals of the Coupe de France and against a far more dangerous opponent in Lille, who are one of the country's biggest clubs both domestically and abroad, along with being one of the 2 clubs in the past decade able to out-control the Ligue 1 trophy from Paris Saint-Germain's grasp. Furthermore, there was also the fact that the Coupe de France semi-finals draw took place before the quarterfinal, and the winner of our match against Lille would end up facing either Marseille or Lyon.
This just got more interesting. I'm gonna pull up a seat and
This just got very interesting.
I certainly had an idea of who I wanted to face if we somehow got through Lille, but we had to tackle what was in front of us first. We were 14 points ahead of second place Pau FC on the Ligue 2 table after 22 games, but with 12 games left, we couldn't afford to fall asleep at the wheel. So, we stuck to doing what we have been doing this entire time in the league by continuing to accumulate wins and draws while scoring our fair share of goals with some exciting football. With defining wins against Pau FC at their ground in late February, sealing a playoff spot in Ligue 2 after defeating Grenoble 3-1 in their ground in mid-March, and then sealing the Ligue 2 title and automatic promotion outright 1 week later by beating Annecy. By the time we wrapped up the Ligue 2 campaign, we had gone 20 games unbeaten, and if not for that loss to Troyes earlier in the year, this could have been an invincible season at the second tier of French football. Alas, we still did what we needed to do and ensured that we would be hopefully causing problems for the big kahunas in Ligue 1 next year. Or rather, for the Big Macs, since, Ligue 1 is sponsored by McDonald's nowadays. Look, memes about the French League be damned, McDonald's is a far better sponsorship than Uber fucking Eats, and I will die on that hill.
McDonald's, bienvenue comme vous êtes.
So, we've talked about Ligue 2, but we still gotta catch up on what happened with the Coupe de France. So, let's go back to early March, where we went into enemy territory at the Decathlon Arena, Stade Pierre-Mauroy, and played an incredibly defensive match where neither side was able to find the back of the net across 90 minutes, thus forcing the need for penalty kicks. Stasson and Giroud would score in the first round. Recoba's shot would be saved by the Lille keeper, but thankfully, Nabil Bentaleb's shot would sail over the goal and into the stands, keeping things even. Bench player Mahmoud Jabert converted his penalty kick, and on Hakon Haraldsson's attempt, Gauthier Lassonnière would step up and make the save to give Saint-Étienne the advantage. Dylan Batumbinska would convert his PK, Thiago Santos would do the same for Lille, and then it was down to former Brighton Academy graduate Joshua Duffus, who proceeded to score and send Saint-Étienne to the semifinals of the Coupe de France. Calling this an upset would be an understatement, as we somehow dragged a perennial French powerhouse into the depths of hell and left them there in order to get to the semifinals for the first time since ISSU's 2019-20 season run in this cup. Of course, it was only fitting that on the other side of the bracket, Lyon would be waiting for us after defeating Marseille 1-0 in their quarterfinal round. Turns out that fans from both teams would not have to wait more than a full calendar year for Le Derby, an apt name for what is known as France's biggest derby, between two incredibly different clubs and really two incredibly different communities who have no love lost for one another. The fact that this would determine who gets to go to the Coupe de France's grand final was only the icing on the cake. For me, the biggest caveat of it all was that we had been drawn as the home team for the Coupe de France semifinal. Personally, I couldn't ask for anything more in my first encounter against John Textor's Ligue 1 team, by having them come to Stade Geoffroy-Guichard to face the music. So imagine my surprise when we're the ones getting hit with the equivalent of sweet chin music, as Lyon proceeded to score 3 goals in the first 15 minutes of the game with far too much ease.
Got him landing on his feet. Oh my God in heaven! The sweet chin music!
But I would be damned if I was going to roll over and let John Textor's goon squad get the better of me in our first encounter. We took a far more attacking approach after conceding the third goal, and with it, Zuriko Davitashvili managed to get one back within a minute to make this a 3-1 game. 5 minutes later, Jeremia Recoba passed it into the box and a sprinty Augustin Boisquet took the shot to score and make this a 3-2 game. We were back in it, and I did not dare to let the foot off the gas. We nearly tied it at the end of the first half with a shot that hit the post, and coming back from the early knockdown by Lyon just made us hungrier in the second half. It would be in the 61st minute where Boisquet dribbled his way into the box and his pass found Florian Tadiou, who hit it in one fluid motion into the bottom left corner of the net, past various bodies and the Lyon keeper. 3-3. Tie game. The momentum was fully in our favor now. Of course, Lyon wasn't going to take this lying down either. They almost got the turnaround goal immediately after our tying one, if not for Ivan Masson's timely block on the goal line. But we would continue to chase after the winning goal even as the minutes played on, and eventually, it was the same exact scenario as it was with Lille. 90 plus minutes and no clear winner. So it was all going to be settled on penalty kicks once again. The man who got the game-tying goal in Florian Tadiu would go first, and he'd score it. For Lyon, they opted to go with Englishman Ainsley Maitland-Niles as their first taker, only for Gauthier Lassonnier to make an incredible save. From here, the next 3 rounds see the takers across both sides of the ball pick their spots and score accordingly to keep these penalty kicks going and for Lyon to stay alive, while hoping for their own keeper to come up with some magic. Eventually, it comes down to Maxime Bernauer to put an end to it all in the 5th round. And he buried it, sending Saint-Étienne to the finals of the Coupe de France. Just, ignore the weird bug with the one guy showing up rushing the net. I'm sure Sports Interactive will get to fixing that sometime in the next 4 to 8 months, along with the backlog of bugs they've got on their message boards. Anyways, this one was an absolute classic. From start to finish, it had action, it had goals, and it's proof that the project we have here can beat out multi-millionaire dollars coming out of one of the whiniest Americans to ever own sports teams of any sort. In the most unexpected turn of events, we've managed to already start making John Textor's life miserable in France, and we're not even back up in Ligue 1 just yet. Oh, you want to know what he said after his club's complete meltdown and loss at the Coupe de France semifinals?
This is corruption, this is a theft.
Yeah, that checks out. Of course, we know very well at this point who's waiting for Saint-Étienne on the other side of the Coupe de France final. I mean, they've been here 8 out of the last 10 finals and won 7 of them, and look, you already know it's Paris Saint-Germain that I'm talking about here. In fact, this was a rematch of the 2019-20 Coupe de France final where PSG beat Saint-Étienne 1-0 at Stade de France. People didn't expect much of us. If anything, the pressure was on Paris Saint-Germain to yet again maintain the status quo and not lay a goose egg like they did against Rennes in the 2018-19 edition of this thing. All we could do at this point was just play the game. And donate our third kits for the first time all season, we did just that.
2 hours later.
I mean, we lost, obviously, but we did give them a scare and even had a lead into the second half with a Stasson counterattack goal that was a thing of beauty to watch. But you know, PSG decided to shit on our hopes and dreams and eventually won it in convincing fashion in extra time. But even that loss could not erase the fact that we did what we needed to do in Ligue 2 and got the bonus of making an unlikely Coupe de France run in the process, all while giving John Textor a taste of what it feels like to lose in Les Derby under important circumstances. But having achieved promotion to the top tier of French football, we now had one big problem. We're predicted to be in a relegation fight this season.
I'm in a hostile environment. I am completely unprepared. I'm surrounded by people who probably want to kick my ass. It's like being back in high school.
So, figuring we were in for a fight, my first signing of this offseason was to bring in 41-year-old legendary center back Thiago Silva for one last ride in France before he hung up the cleats. He may have not been the same physical freak of nature as he was during his younger days with Paris Saint-Germain, but his experience and personality traits for a full season would go a long way to help develop some of the younger talent at the club. Plus, what better way to terrify a self-proclaimed billionaire like John Textor than to bring in the monster to man our backline? After the sudden retirement of our backup keeper Brice Bleu, I ended up finding another backup to take his place in Norwegian keeper Kjetil Hogg, who we got on a free transfer. It was the same deal for veteran Greek defender Karalambos Lykoyannis, plus youngsters Diego Brie and Youssef Oualil. But once the transfer window opened, we made 3 specific moves that would go on to define our season to come. First, we sold Irvin Cardona for a total fee of 16.25 million euros to Al Ittihad to bolster our transfer funds, and then used them to acquire fullback Keita Kosugi from Djurgårdens in Sweden for 1.3 million euros, then made our biggest splash of this current managerial era by paying 12.5 million euros to acquire Norwegian wonderkid winger Oskar Spittenisseter out of Molde amidst all of our friendlies. These signings would set us up for success in our Ligue 1 season opener, as Igor Miladinovic would score the only goal of the match. And given that win was against the likes of Stade Rennais, I was pretty happy with it.
I really dislike the club Rennes in France.
Ligue 1 did show our games were not going to be the same cakewalks we had in Ligue 2, as even amidst getting points in our early fixtures, we had tough outings against the likes of Toulouse, RC Lens, Nice, Strasbourg, and Nantes. We kept ourselves unbeaten against them, but they were games on a much closer margin, and those would be followed by the first loss of our season against Paris FC at their ground. But the early going of the Ligue 1 season did give me some perspective, in that we were a club capable of holding their own at this level with our current tactical approach. Another 2 wins followed against Montpellier and Lorient, who were towards the bottom half of the table, but an early goal from Lille in our first encounter against them since the Coupe de France quarterfinals last year led to a 1-0 loss. The surprising portion of the season did come when Angers, fighting to get out of the relegation zone, decided to dismantle us at home 3-1 to prove that you cannot let your guard down around anybody in Ligue 1. That almost turned into a full 3-game losing streak when we faced Monaco on their ground, if it wasn't for Lucas Tassan making a rare appearance off the bench to rescue the game and 3 full points in stunning fashion with a brace in stoppage time, which only fueled his confidence to score our only goal on the road against Brest in a challenging 1-0 victory. I'm not making any jokes about their name, the CBS Champions League crew already beat that dead horse into the ground and then had Jamie Carragher spit on it afterward for good measure. Moving on, the next stop on our calendar would be the first Le Derby of the Ligue 1 season, where we would be hosting Lyon. Although prior to that matchup, the board of directors for both Dortmund and Besiktas contacted me about interviewing for their vacant manager position.
Hello amigo, how are you? Come to...
I have a rich American's demise in French football to see to, and I can't be doing things like taking jobs outside of France interrupting that. So, Le Derby et Le Chaudron was our next stop, as Lyon would visit the site of one of their more agonizing defeats in recent months, and unlike last season, our defense was far more solidified. We held them scoreless for the entire first half. Oskar Spittenisseter and Zuriko Davitashvili scored 2 goals in the first half, and even with Martin Sattegrano's goal in the second half, we hold on to the result and come out of our second straight encounter with Textor's Goons with a W. 14 games into our Ligue 1 season, I'd say this was the game that ended up defining not just our entire season moving forward, but also Lyon's. Sure, our follow-up games after Le Derby against Paris Saint-Germain and Marseille resulted in losses along with a bizarre draw to Guingamp, left us at 3 games without a win. But then, we got our Coupe de France draw for the 9th round, aka the round of 64. And we ended up sorted against Lyon for a rematch of last year's semifinal at this stage. And we'd be the ones hosting it again. I felt like the universe was smiling upon me with that draw, and given how recent our initial Ligue 1 match had been against Lyon, we took a similar approach to that of the league match, and while the goals came in at different time frames, it was almost a mirror match of the Ligue 1 bout, as we yet again defeated Lyon 2-1 and eliminated them from the Coupe de France just as swiftly as they came into it.
Have a nice fall, you stupid bitch.
Gum would be our next foe in the round of 32 of the French Cup, but I was more interested in the fact that our league game form after 17 games had us within the top 4 of the Ligue 1 table while Lyon had slid down to the lower half of it. Quite a decent way to go on an international window break at the end of the year and return in January for a 0-0 draw against Rennes. While this was followed with a 2-0 win versus Gangon in the Coupe de France, along with some solid wins in Ligue 1 against the likes of Nice and Strasbourg through January, we did lose Karalambo's Likoyanis to a fractured collarbone for the next 7 to 9 weeks, and also Igor Miladinovic to a sprained knee ligament for around a month during that stretch. For the round of 16 of the Coupe de France, we drew a 4th tier side in Saint-Privé Saint-Hilaire FC, who would also be hosting the game. They are at the lower levels of the French pyramid, but they have history in this cup competition with one of the biggest upsets in its history, as they once managed to knock out Toulouse in the 2019-20 edition of the tournament in the round of 64. We treated Saint-Hilaire FC in the same manner we treat a Ligue 1 team, by going for their jugular from the jump, as Davitashvili and U19 team youngster Karim Cissé scored early and we kept pouring the pressure on the amateur side throughout the match. It would end up being a 2-0 win at the end, but given the amount of shots we had on goal, it's a credit to Saint-Hilaire for holding us down to only 2 goals. After a close loss to Nantes in Ligue 1, we got the news that we'd face Monaco in the quarterfinals of the Coupe de France, which caught me by surprise, because they had somehow given Paris Saint-Germain what would turn out to be one of their only 2 losses in any of the domestic competitions this season, and opened this cup competition wide open for anybody to take it. Prior to that showdown, we did recover from the Nantes loss with huge results like a comeback to draw Paris FC 3-3 along with wins over Montpellier on the road and a 4-3 thriller victory against Toulouse. Although as the month of March began, our form in Ligue 1 definitely took a dip as Lorient surprised us with a 1-0 victory while they were attempting to fight off being dead last in the league. We choked a lead against Lyon to lose 2-1 and yet again struggled against Angers in a 1-1 draw to wrap things up there. Throughout the rest of the Ligue 1 season, our only 2 wins through those last 2 months of it were a shocking result against second place Marseille, and of course, a 3-2 win against Lyon in their stadium as Oscar Spit and Niesetter found the game winner late in the 88th minute against that lot and helped us complete a full sweep against Textor's crew.
This is corruption, this is a theft.
Even though we did struggle in the final stretch of Ligue 1, our efforts throughout the whole season bore the most unlikely of fruit, as Saint-Étienne managed to finish with 55 points in the league and due to goal differential, finished it in 4th place, putting us in the last qualifying spot that would get us into the 3rd qualifying round of the league phase for the UEFA Champions League.
Well, that was unexpected.
Now, under no illusions whatsoever that this team is ready for that kind of competition, but we played the cards that were dealt, so that's something we'll tackle in the off-season. Just like in our first episode of this whole series, we're going back in time now to talk about the Coupe de France in our quarterfinal match against AS Monaco. Going into Stade Louis II, Saint-Étienne drew first blood with Lucas Tasson's goal in the 26th minute, one in which would be countered within minutes by Danish forward Mika Biarret in the 35th minute for Monaco. But we decided to channel the spirit of non paella-eating terrorist Mikel Arteta, as a corner kick of ours found center-back Mikel Nade's head at the far post, who sent it into the back of the net for an unlikely 2-1 victory and to send Levet to consecutive Coupe de France semi-final appearances. Yet another rematch from last year's Cup would take place, as we were set to face Lyon in the semi-final, an encounter that had been scheduled to happen days after our 3rd encounter of the season against Lyon. As I'd mentioned, the team had been trending downward during those Ligue 1 games, but the Lyon victory came at the right time. because we took the upward momentum from beating our biggest rivals and channeled into playing a complete game against a team who had our number throughout the Ligue 1 season. Miladinovic would open up the scoring early, Harautson would retort for Lyon, and then Augustin Boquet would take the lead back, all of it happening within the first 30 minutes of the game. We managed to hold on to the 2-1 result before Igor Miladinovic managed to find his second goal in the 88th minute to stick the dagger in, before Zuriko Davitashvili opted to twist it even further for good measure with another goal in stoppage time. A 4-1 victory that was far harder to gain than the score might indicate, and once again, Saint-Étienne were headed to the Coupe de France final, and they'd be across FC Lorient, whose relegation to Ligue 2 had been confirmed in the last few fixtures of the league. So for Lorient, this match meant everything, while for us, we already had a European competition spot guaranteed for next season, regardless of how those qualifying rounds went. Look, I've watched enough sports in my lifetime to know a trap game when I see one. At Stade de France, it would take close to 30 minutes, but FC Lorient would prove as much, as they won the ball in the midfield and after some crisp passing, they found the pass in the space where Ryan Goulis was able to find his shot past Larsonnet for the first goal of the game. 1-0 Lorient. We were basically in the worst case scenario. Lorient was defending well, our players were getting chances but not finding the target, and the first half would end up staying 1-0. The message to the players was a rather simple one, especially given that we were starting to find our groove. Keep going, because you have the ability to make a difference. So, go figure we get beaten out on a few passes across space and get a little too conservative with tackles inside the box, which allows Joel Vimvuka to score Lorient's second goal within the first 2 minutes of the half.
God damn it!
Okay, this wasn't ideal, but we'd done comebacks in a similar manner before. The response did come just about 10 minutes later through an incredible effort out of defensive midfielder Aymen Mouthek, who ran it down the right-hand side, had his first shot blocked, but the second one found the mark. 2-1, and now we were in the exact same position we had Paris Saint-Germain in last year. So, we continued to stay on the attack, which comes with its own risks, as a near-fatal counterattack by Lorient demonstrated 2 minutes after our goal. But we had the score to stay alive in this final. Chance after chance would come, and yet, FC Lorient would hold on and defend for dear life. More and more, this was starting to resemble last year's final, but unlike Paris Saint-Germain, our offense was not filled with a plethora of Champions League experience caliber players who could keep their cool and find the crucial goal. However, as we got into stoppage time and were at the throwing everything in the kitchen sink moment of the game, Aymen Mouthek made a run across the right side and into the box, where he was tripped. A penalty kick was given. One last lifeline. So, I made a decision in terms of our penalty taker. I told none other than Thiago Silva to take this penalty. Now, Thiago Silva has been playing okay for us throughout the year at age 42, but up to this point, he had not scored a single goal for us, and I decided to send him out to take the most important kick in this club's most recent history. Turns out that was the right idea all along, because the monster scored the kind of penalty kick that will live in Saint-Étienne lore for decades to come. 2-2. Tie game. Now FC Lorient kind of understands how we felt last year after the Bradley Barcola goal. The game did go to extra time, and unlike last year, the defenses on both sides still had enough in them to do their jobs, and not even 120 minutes would be enough to decide this game. For the first time this season, we'd be going to penalty kicks in the Coupe de France. Something we really did get used to last year. Ramon would go first for FC Lorient and he'd score to get this thing started. And while Thiago Silva got us the tying goal via penalty kick in regulation, his PK attempt wasn't so successful the second time around. Hey, he got us here to begin with. I can forgive him for going 1 of 2 here. Especially when we have Gauthier Lassonnet on net for us.
What a save!
The moment that Zuriko Davitashvili scored his penalty kick to make it 1-1, I was confident we had it covered. All Gauthier Lassonnet did was to prove my conviction, as he saved the next 2 penalty kick attempts from Lorient in a row. Ligoyanis and Bernauer converted their attempts, and Saint-Étienne could finally call themselves Coupe de France Cup winners for the first time since 1977, bringing the first major top-tier trophy to the club since the 1981 Ligue 1 title. It was a butt-clenching affair at the end, but all in all, we've had an incredibly successful season with Livet, between the unexpected top 4 finish, the Coupe de France trophy win, and doing it all while Lyon were forced to watch from 12th place on the league table with no trophies to show for their efforts. Needless to say, it was another successful year of making John Textor's life absolutely miserable in France. There was also the bonus of being able to help a legend of world football in Thiago Silva win one last trophy before he retired from the sport. But now, the challenges ahead in the 2027-28 season would be greater than before. A return to continental football for Saint-Étienne, and the goal to continue playing up to the standards we set during this past season while maintaining our core players intact. But whether we'll manage to do it or not, one thing's for certain. We're guaranteed to make Textor miserable just by virtue of playing in Europe next season. So, with us being qualified for the UEFA Champions League's 3rd qualifying round in the league path, I did have some initial concerns about us not being battle-tested enough for Europe as a whole. Then I saw that Tottenham Hotspur finally won the Champions League this past season, so my concerns immediately diminished.
Anything's possible. Anything's possible!
We're gonna be just fine. In fact, our biggest signing during this offseason before those games was centre-back Christoph Janens from SK Beveren for 650,000 euros, and I only brought him in because we needed bench depth at the position, since we sold Shikulamba officially for 2.7 million euros. At least, that's what I would say, if not for the fact that after some tough negotiations with Benfica over the summer, I paid 8 million euros to bring in midfielder Richard Hughes into the ranks. Outside of some loan movements after the Rio signing, we got word we'd be playing Legia Warszawa in the Champions League 3rd qualifying round, and if we survived that, we'd get the winner of Fenerbahce or SK Slavia Prague. The first leg against Legia was a game of missed opportunities, as it ended up in a 0-0 draw at home. Thankfully, Ryan Andrews' own goal in the 2nd minute of the 2nd leg game would be enough to win and move Saint-Étienne to the playoff round of the league path, where we'd end up playing Slavia Prague. We prepared for that game by playing a thriller in our Ligue 1 opener against Angers, where Igor Miladinovic had to score a brace to get us a 3-3 draw, and that goal scoring would continue the following week against Paris FC, where one of our prospects in Julien Guesson got a rare start and proceeded to get a hat-trick in a 4-0 win. Which was really nice, given that the first leg of the playoff round against Slavia Prague was another boring 0-0 draw. Thankfully, the 2nd leg had more firepower to it, as Saint-Étienne came out victorious with a 3-1 win and officially won their way into the league phase of the UEFA Champions League. That's the good news. The bad news is that it cost us, as Lucas Tasson sprained his ankle and Gauthier Lassonnet fractured his finger during that game. At least, it can't get any worse. The shock of that fixture list seemed to have done something to our team, as we got our asses whooped 5-0 by RC Lyon that had our own players refunding the away fans' tickets before recovering the following week with a 2-0 win over Gangom. We also got a pretty solid offer for Thiago Spinoza from Valladolid and sold them for over 5 million euros to them before a tough 3-2 win on the road against Rennes and our Champions League debut against Newcastle at St. James's Park. Given who calls that city home, I wasn't exactly looking forward to the trip.
Come on, you fat slug! Oh, you fucking...
But alas, like Roy Khan and old school Camelot, we would just have to carry on. To our dismay, we conceded an early goal to Joelinton of all people, but Oscar Spitten-Niesetter would eventually find the tying goal in the second half to help us manage an unlikely 1-1 draw against the Saudi-backed machine. While we wouldn't be as lucky against Fiorentina a week later, with Moise Kean getting an 87th minute winner that led us to losing that one 2-1, we did at least take that momentum into the following Ligue 1 games through September all the way until late October, going unbeaten through that series of games across all competitions, which did include a Le Derby on the road against Lyon ending up 1-1, a 1-1 draw against Dortmund in the Champions League, and that streak only came to a stop at Parc des Princes, as we were beaten 3-2 by a Paris Saint-Germain side that was about to run away with Ligue 1 for yet another year. Not to worry, we took out the frustrations of our unbeaten streak being lost by beating up Lille 4-2 a week later, having a pretty boring 0-0 draw against Leverkusen to kick off November in the Champions League, which kicked off a lackluster month where our only win was against Nice on the road. It'd be mostly draws and losses throughout the rest of the month, including being yet another victim of known Norwegian JRPG final boss Erling Haaland in a 1-0 loss to Manchester City in the Champions League at the Etihad. I'm not mad. I'm just stating a fact that the two pricks from Oasis do not make a full fan base. Moving on, another disappointing draw to FC Metz follows suit in December, but the turnaround game to all of this did come when we hosted Juventus at Les Chaudrons. A record-setting goal from Igor Miladinovic kicked things off in a high gear, Stasson and OSN follow suit, and we managed our first victory during this entire league phase to at least show we have some semblance of a pulse in the Champions League. Apparently, the win was impressive enough to have Leverkusen approach me with a job interview for their empty manager position. But look, we haven't made John Textor miserable enough yet, so we're sticking around. While that victory cost us Ivan Masson for 2 to 3 months with a hip injury, we did manage to overcome Brest's approaches at their home with a 2-0 victory, then thrashed lower tier side Villefranche-Beaujolais in the 9th round of the Coupe de France to lead us into the mid-season break in French football and onto the new year of 2028. It also meant that with our first Coupe de France win in eons last season, we'd actually get to face Paris Saint-Germain for the Trophée des Champions to kick off the year. And even with me creating an alternate variation of the Alaverde tactic that was a bit more cautious in its approach and positioning, that still didn't stop Bradley Barcola from yet again ripping our hearts out in a cup game of some sort by scoring a brace, as we were defeated 2-1.
Because I've had enough of this dude. Just cut it right out of the frame. Well,
Tying with Alger in Ligue 1 immediately after was a brutal double whammy, but to their credit, they're actually having a good season. So, with the January transfer window open, I decided to get some reinforcements for both sides of the ball. And so I went out and got Linus Gector from Hertha Berlin for 4.4 million euros, who arrived in time for a Coupe de France game and 3-1 victory over Laval MFC, and Luis Engels from SC Paderborn for 7 million euros, who would debut in our 2-0 win against Anderlecht in the Champions League. 7 games into the Champions League, we're somehow 18th place on the table with 1 game to go in the league phase. I mean, sure, Arsenal is our last game of the docket, they're infinitely better funded than us, and they finally got rid of that paella-eating terrorist Mikel Arteta as their manager, and look, so long as we don't get wiped out by a massive score, we still have a shot at 23rd or 24th place to just squeeze into the next round.
2 hours later.
Wait, we actually won? And we got to 15th place and into the top half seeding of the next round? Well, that's a couple of extra million in the books I wasn't expecting.
Fuck it, we ball.
After wrapping up January with a 1-0 win against Guingamp on the road, we got sorted against AC Sparta Praha for the knockout playoff round of the Champions League, and then followed suit with a thriller in the round of 16 of the Coupe de France against Montpellier, which ended up in a 1-1 draw after 120 minutes, and where Gauthier Lassonnière showed his mettle yet again during penalty kicks to help us advance to the quarterfinals, in which we were put in against Toulouse. After the transfer windows closing in France at the start of February, our team was in place and the month saw us continue to fight for our place in the top 4 of Ligue 1, as we had a pair of draws against Rennes and Reims, try saying that 5 times fast, and also had the joy of wiping John Textor's smile off his face once more with a 3-2 win at Les Chaldrons against Lyon. I mean, sure, Nantes beat us 4-1 immediately afterward, but we went unbeaten in Les Derby for the 3rd year straight, and that's a win in and of itself, baby. Oh, right, the knockout playoff round of the Champions League against Sparta Praha did not go so well in the first leg, as we struggled on the road and Albion Romani carried the Czech side to a 2-1 victory. Unfortunately for them, they couldn't quite handle a cool night in France, as Saint-Étienne proceeded to beat the brakes off of them 4-0 to advance to the round of 16 and face Celtic. Look, this is nothing against Sparta Praha or Celtic, but yeah, these are sides I felt we could actually defeat given the gauntlet we survived to get here in the first place. So I wasn't sweating the fact we'd have to play the second leg in Glasgow at all, especially since we took a 1-0 aggregate advantage there from beating them in the first leg. In fact, Celtic proved to be exactly who we thought they were, as the second leg was a 1-1 draw, and we were now somehow in the quarterfinals of the Champions League and against Sporting CP of Portugal.
What?!
In between those 2 rounds of the Champions League, we may have screwed the pooch entirely and lost 3-2 to Toulouse in the Coupe de France quarterfinals, along with having our fair share of mixed results in Ligue 1 through March and early April, including yet another close loss to PSG. It may have also not helped that we lost Gauthier Lassonnière to injury for 2 to 4 weeks with a fractured wrist just before the Champions League quarterfinals against Sporting. But we did beat Sporting CP 1-0 at home, then went on the road to Portugal to beat them by the same exact result without breaking a sweat. So go figure that's where we run into Newcastle, the very first opponents we had in this whole saga of ours. The first leg at Les Chaldrons is the exact same result as the first time around we faced them, as we came out of it with a 1-1 draw after a Lucas Tassan goal. By the time the second leg got here, This is where reality finally decided to smack us in the face as we took a 4-0 thrashing at Newcastle's hands to finally end this incredibly lucky run we just happened to stumble on. No, seriously. Sparta Praha, Celtic, and Sporting as our opponents up to this point, while avoiding the Liverpools, Real Madrids, and PSGs of the world. This was like the one time in Uma Musume polls where I managed to get multiple 3-star horse girls in one row and pretty much tanked my entire luck stat for the rest of this decade. Let's hope we can make this team better for next year, because the rest of our Ligue 1 run through the season showed signs of a team that can beat some good teams but also really struggle against mediocre ones too. Well, except Brest. We definitely beat up Brest badly enough near the end of the season to where we sent them to the playoff relegation series against whoever comes out of Ligue 2.
My bad.
That said, by the end of Ligue 1 and our efforts in it, we did do enough to get a 3rd place finish and fully guarantee our way into the league phase of the Champions League next season. Also, please believe that I'm going to push our board to improve every single facility we have in the off-season, given the amount of money we made from this season's European escapade. The downside of making ourselves so noticeable, however, just so happened to be that Oscar Spitzenniesetter had seen the world at large, and he was ready to jump out of our cauldron. So we do have the immediate challenge of Oscar Spitzenniesetter wanting to play with better players and trying to force a move out of the club. Initially, I tried to talk him down by telling him about the good prospects we have coming up to help. That doesn't work. I tried to tempt him with a pay raise. That also doesn't work. Finally, I pull out the card that I'm only going to sell him if an acceptable bid comes through. And he asks me what a considerable bid would be.
Holy shit!
Well, unless somebody gives us over 100 million euros for him, Oscar isn't going anywhere. But if there is going to be any follow-up for this overachiever run we made in Europe, I have to strengthen the roster beyond just getting young prospects into the academy pipeline. After selling Pierre Equa to Fulham on an offer I couldn't refuse of 17 million and also sold Shetio Hogg, I reinvested that money immediately to get defensive midfielder Albert Sambi Lokonga for 15 million euros and a future starting keeper in the making in Alex Couto Horio Pisano for 2.5 million out of Nagoya Grampus. We also started sending a few of our promising youngsters out on loan for them to get good experience prior to taking the field in our first Ligue 1 game of the season against the practically forever champs in Paris Saint-Germain. A game in which we yet again found ourselves surrendering a goal super late to let victory escape from our grasp, as we ended up with a 2-2 draw from it. But taking points off PSG as a whole is a rarity, so we gladly embraced that bit of momentum and just kept ourselves unbeaten through the rest of the month with wins and draws, including our first encounter of the season against Lyon, where we beat the brakes off of them 3-0 in Les Chaudrons just shortly after the summer transfer window closed down. Wait, Bradley Barcolo's gone? Now, while our Champions League fixture schedule this season was nowhere near as brutal as last season's, we still got the double whammy of Liverpool and Galatasaray in the starting stretch, and then had Real Madrid and Newcastle to wrap it up by late January. So, after a disappointing draw against Strasbourg on the road in Ligue 1, we hosted the Scousers in our humble abode. Much like Dave Bautista, they would walk alone for this one, as we snagged a rather dominant 2-1 win and ensured that Liverpool superfan Flying Orangutan would cope by watching Latvian intermingled men's and women's Olympic underwater hockey this week.
No, how irreversibly immediate.
It's also around this time in which we strike an essential deal for the January window and onward, paying 8.75 million euros to Sanfrecce Hiroshima to bring in 19-year-old phenom Kohei Nakagawa into the fold. We'll talk more about him later on in the season, but for now, the momentum from the Liverpool win also carries us against Galatasaray, with Lucas Stason scoring a brace in Istanbul to kick off our Champions League in the best way possible. This would translate into success in both Ligue 1 and within the Champions League, as our only loss through that whole stretch was a 4-2 loss to Lens early in October, one in which we bounced back by trouncing Paris FC 4-0 the week after, and kept alternating between wins and draws across the table. But the few draws we accumulated during this stretch kept us about 6 points behind PSG on the table, and with Lille, Strasbourg, and Reims right on our neck behind us by the mid-season break. As for the Champions League, a draw against Celtic at Paradise, and then 2 crucial wins over RB Salzburg and Eintracht Frankfurt sealed a guaranteed place in the next stage of the competition. A nice cushion to have, given the last 2 continental matchups we have in January with Real Madrid and Newcastle. It did come with some sacrifices, as OSN sprained his ankle during the Frankfurt game and was out for the rest of December and early January, but even his absence would not be enough to stop us from defeating Clermont Foot before the mid-season break in the 9th round of the Coupe de France, setting us up for an encounter against Red Star FC in the following round. So that brought us to January 2028. Nakagawa officially arrived as a member of our roster, and he'd get his big debut in our first match of the year against PSG in Ligue 1, which was another 2-2 draw, although we were the ones making the comeback to steal points on this one. The confidence from the unbeaten run across all competitions was only emboldened by this result, as we dealt with Red Star FC in the Coupe de France's 10th round afterward with a rotated side, and then headed to Stadio Santiago Bernabéu for our 7th league stage Champions League game against Real Madrid. That was the slap back to reality that we weren't all of that on the power scale, as they beat us down 4-2 in what admittedly was an entertaining game. Our momentum in Ligue 1 also got smacked promptly after the Madrid game, as Nice beat us at Le Chaudron 2-0 and sent us down to 4th place on the table in the process. And of course, we had a rematch against Newcastle from last year's Champions League semi-finals on the docket, with the Geordies coming into our ground for it, and both of our sides fighting to stay in the top 8 to earn that round of 16 bye. Given our past 2 losses, we did play a far more attacking version of our typical game, and it appeared to catch Newcastle by surprise, as Igor Miladinovic scored a brace in the second half, and we ended up with a statement-making 3-0 victory to finish 4th place in the league stage table, in ensuring Saint-Étienne a round of 16 spot. Granted, such an emotional victory and using most of our starters for it meant we did have to rotate a little for Le Derby against Lyon on their ground, and that ended up being a disappointing 1-1 draw. I say disappointing because, of course, the whole point of this thing primarily is to make John Textor miserable. Anyway, we declined bids for Richard Hughes from various clubs through the January window, dismantled Lille on their home ground with a 4-0 victory in the round of 16 of the Coupe de France, and watched the winter transfer deadline pass by without doing much besides the Nakagawa purchase. We did, however, see Wojciech Kvaratskhelia get sold from PSG to Liverpool for 146 million euros. Somehow, someway, I do not believe anything good is going to come out of giving the Parisians this much money. But because Oscar Spitanisetter didn't get this sort of money move during this transfer window, he decided to drop the whole wanting to leave the club thing. So at least, that's one bullet dodged, and I'm immediately making a mental note to extend his contract in the summer. The aftermath of the transfer window saw us continue our run through Ligue 1 to maintain a top 4 spot in the table, managing our way through key injuries to the likes of Alex Pisano, Richard Rios, and Oscar Spitten-Niesetter, and also hearing countless rumors of a potential takeover of the club, all while getting our Coupe de France quarterfinal draw against Marseille and the round of 16 draw in the Champions League, putting us against Italian giants Juventus. The first leg against Juventus ended up being a 2-2 thriller at Allianz Stadium, where we scored 2 early goals to shock the Turin side, but they eventually grew into the game and fought back to earn the draw. But having the second leg happening in our ground, I was pretty confident of our chances to come out of this victorious. And while it did take over 60 minutes, we finally did break down the Juventus defense and eventually won the second leg 3-0 to advance to the quarterfinals of the Champions League, where we were drawn against Inter Milan. Against the Nerazzurri, we hosted the first leg of the game in early April, and in a cagey affair, we managed to continue our solid home form across all competitions by beating the Italians 2-1 to take the advantage going into the San Siro. But while the second leg in Italy saw us come in with the advantage and extend it even further after 2 first-half goals, with us leading the game 2-1 at the half, well, Lautaro Martinez happened. Twice. Then they got a late-game goal that would be enough to not only give Inter Milan a 4-2 victory, but to also overturn the aggregate fully and knock us out of the Champions League entirely. It was a disappointing exit given the defensive meltdown, but at the same time, Inter Milan's one of the elites in this competition, and we 100% overachieved for the second year in a row in just getting this far in the competition. So I took it all to heart and decided to laser focus on the competitions we were still in. Ligue 1 through March and April had its fair share of battles. Frustrating draws against Nantes and Toulouse, the latter which included an injury to Zurico Davitashvili, an incredible pair of stoppage time goals against Marseille to beat him 2-0 on the road, then some more disappointment as we were defeated by those bastards at Rennes 1-0, then played the equivalent of Pictionary on the table with multiple draws in a row before taking those frustrations out in the last game of the Ligue 1 season against Brest, beating them 5-2 and actually getting them relegated this time due to it. Again, I've got nothing against Brest personally, but with Strasbourg and Lyon on our asses, we needed a victory here to secure third place. But outside of Ligue 1 and the Champions League quarterfinals exit, we were thriving in the Coupe de France. Rewinding back to March for a sec, we had Marseille in the quarterfinals, and after being reminded by Fabrizio Romano and Twitter for the umpteenth time that a certain wife-beater still had a footballing career and was thriving on Marseille, well, I reminded our guys of that fact in the locker room, and they got particularly inspired, as Igor Miladinovic scored a hat-trick in the first half and 4 goals overall, and by the time the whistle blew in the second half, we had beaten the unholy living fuck out of Marseille 8-0 to advance to the semifinals of the Coupe de France.
Get your ass whooped!
The semifinal round against Guingamp was our match immediately after the 1-0 Rennes loss. While we definitely struggled to break them down, a solo Miladinovic goal would be enough to carry us through the victory into our third Coupe de France final in 4 years, which is legitimately impressive and something I'm proud of. Our opponents in that final would be RC Lens, who had beaten Paris FC on penalty kicks to get to this point. Lens had been a consistently tough opponent for us, where we trade wins back and forth depending on which ground we played one another. However, in a neutral ground and taking a more defensively responsible approach, the only goal in the entirety of that final would be Lucas Stasson's penalty kick converted in the 47th minute, which would secure us our second Coupe de France trophy in 4 years and a very positive end to the season. 4 years into the job, we had 2 trophies to our name, some solid appearances in Europe. We were consistently placing in the top 3 of France to get into European football, but with our 5th year in the horizon, I did feel we had all the elements in place to take the next step in this journey. Because while continuing our superiority over Lyon and John Textor was satisfying, this story has become much bigger than flexing on a billionaire over the past 2 seasons. With certain players of ours breaking team records, a rising war chest that was nearing 9 figures, and one of the best youth academies in the globe that's only going to get better, well, as one particular baseball catcher once said,
might as well go win the whole fucking thing.
But how do you win the whole thing? Sure, a future investment like fullback Luka Robin for 5.25 million euros that will be on loan for the rest of the season is a decent start, but we needed a couple of players that would be ready to handle different roles in a busy calendar fixture. So I grabbed veteran midfielder Ton Koopmeiners and versatile winger Tidian Gomes on free transfers, paid 1.6 million euros to RB Leipzig for American fullback Alex Freeman, and also sent away a couple of older faces like Ivan Masson on loan, sold Ayman Mouefek for 5.5 million to Espanyol, and agreed on a loan with a mandatory future fee of 16.5 million euros for Gauthier Lassonnet. With age and injuries over the last few seasons slowing him down, I was ready to transition to Alex Pisano as our starting keeper. But it was during this preseason window of the 2029-30 season in which, as a club, we made one of our most important bits of transfer business, paying Romanian side Universitatea Cluj a total of 16 million euros to bring in wonder kid defensive midfielder Marius Stan, who looked already like the finished product as a player and 19 years old. Stan's signing also meant we kinda had an odd man out at the defensive midfielder position, so that made it much easier when Monterrey from Liga MX came asking for Richard Rios, who we sold to them for 7.5 million euros, along with continuing to send some of our best academy prospects on loan to get experience, with the focus being on some of them being ready to integrate into the first team by next season. While we did that and continued to hear about takeover talks for Saint-Étienne, I focused on ensuring that our collective bonuses for the season would be the highest amount possible for our squad and coaching staff. Because the main goal for the season was to finally overthrow Paris Saint-Germain and win Ligue 1. 2 third-place finishes had gotten us into Europe, we overachieved in European competitions the past 2 years, and we played a system in which our players are very used to by this point. So, we are immediately going to work, and we sent a statement to the rest of France by beating Strasbourg 4-1 to open the season. Oscar Spitt, the knee setter, scores a brace the following weekend to help us beat Marseille 3-1 on the road. Then we trash Lens in their own house 5-0 before wrapping up August with a dominant 3-0 win over Rennes.
I really dislike the club Rennes in France.
Good first month, and our Champions League fixtures would see some intriguing matchups, like a rematch against Juventus from last season's round of 16 to open up our fixtures in the competition, plus another encounter versus Celtic, hosting Real Madrid and Newcastle at home, getting Atletico de Madrid on the road, plus some first-time encounters against the likes of Union Saint-Gilloise, Basel, and the other half of the old firm in Rangers. During the transfer window, the only big move it really made was sending one of our best prospects in Eric Laramendi over to Trabzonspor in Turkey to get some playing time, along with getting a percentage of former player Chico Lamba's sale to Osijek before the closure of the window. However, we also had to deal with injuries to Oscar Spitt and Nisetter, Albert Sami Lokonga, and Augustin Boquet for the next couple of weeks as we moved into September, barely escaping with a 2-1 win against Angers, and missing a crucial chance to win against Nice at home in a 1-1 draw before our first game of the Champions League campaign against Juventus, in which Lucas Tassan showed out, scoring a brace at Allianz Stadium and ensuring a solid 3-0 victory to start off our European adventures for the season. For the remainder of the first half of the 2029-30 season, the Ligue 1 campaign was one of resilience, where we turned results that were draws in past seasons into victories for us, resulting in an unbeaten streak that had us going toe-to-toe against Paris Saint-Germain in the standings. Of course, those results included a big win at Groupama Stadium against Lyon in the first Le Derby of the season. The Champions League, however, did yield some challenges as we did draw against Union SG, managed to overcome Celtic on the road, got dismantled by Real Madrid at home, but turned it around against Atletico de Madrid and Newcastle to ensure a playoff spot into the next stage. Additionally, we also started our road to defend the Coupe de France with a solid 2-0 win against FC Annecy before the mid-season break. At the beginning of the new decade with January 2030, it felt fitting to start the year with a victory over Strasbourg on the road, and then have Marius Stan step up massively in the Trophée des Champions match against Paris Saint-Germain, scoring both goals and winning as the French Super Cup equivalent. And anytime that you can defeat PSG, you take that and you roll with it. We did just that against Rennes in a 3-1 win in Ligue 1 before playing a cagey match in the 10th round of the Coupe de France against Strasbourg, where Alex Pisano showed his mettle with a pair of saves to ensure a 4-2 win on penalty kicks. We kept the good times rolling through the month with a landslide win over Basel in the Champions League and Angers in Ligue 1 shortly after, but then got the equivalent of a claymore kick to the face by those bastards in Glasgow as we lost in surprising fashion to Rangers 3-1. Placement-wise, we still did enough to secure 8th place on the league phase of the Champions League and secured a round of 16 spot, but it was far too close for comfort. Nice took advantage of this in Ligue 1, defeating us 3-2 in a match where we rotated players due to the midweek fixture against Rangers, and with 2 games on hand, PSG could easily make up the difference against us in the standings if we kept giving them opportunities. So I needed the boys to lock in, and thankfully, they got the message in the 11th round of the Coupe de France, as we engineered a comeback to defeat Lyon 2-1 to start the month of February. And we would yet again meet Lyon in the competition, as we'd been drawn against them for the quarterfinals. However, our most important game of the month would be an away fixture at Parc des Princes, as Paris Saint-Germain hosted us, and thanks to the efforts of Linus Gekta and Lucas Tassan, we were able to escape with a monumental 2-1 victory over Les Parisiens to extend our lead in the league table over them. So, go figure that Kohei Nakagawa is injured yet again, this time with a sports hernia.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
That still didn't stop us from beating Marseille at home 3-0 shortly after and making it a 14-point gap between us and PSG. It was an advantage in which we would not let go of for the final 10 games of the season, with it all culminating on match week 31, as we squared up against Lyon at Les Chaudrons. And while they played a tougher match against us compared to the previous attempts, Oscar Spittenniesetter and Lucas Tassan scored in the first half, Alex Pisano kept a clean sheet, and for the first time since the 1980-81 season, Saint-Étienne were on top of French football as the Ligue 1 winners. Look, if beating our biggest rivals at home to claim our first French League trophy in 50 years while breaking the PSG hegemony after beating said rivals in the Coupe de France quarterfinals earlier in the year isn't enough to get that fandom to try and bully John Textor out of their club ownership, I do not know what's going to do it. Wait, actually, hang on. how about following that league title win with beating Marseille in the semifinals of the Coupe de France 2-0 a few days afterward? And then being across Paris Saint-Germain once again throughout the season in the big Coupe de France final? I mean, sure, it was a back-and-forth affair of a game in which featured Victor Osimhen scoring an apparent game winner in the 86th minute, only for Miguel Almeida, another one of our academy gens, to tie it up in stoppage time to send us to yet another extra time encounter against them, only for us to surrender a game-winning goal in the following minute to Dominic Szoboszlai, who was on loan with PSG for the rest of that season. But hey, that's a Ligue 1 win and a Coupe de France final in the same season, with Lyon eating shit all the way through the year on our way to that. That clearly has to count for something, right?
I'm not fucking leaving!
Shit. Okay, well, drastic measures then. Let's talk about how the rest of the Champions League went that season.
Flashback.
So, near the end of February, we got drawn against Manchester United in the round of 16 of the Champions League. For the first leg, we had to travel to Old Trafford, and we were going into that game with Nakagawa still being injured, and both Keita Kosagi and Marius Stan serving yellow card suspensions. So, even though we put up a fight, some crucial errors let Rasmus Højlund and Marcus Rashford score, and the 2-1 loss at Old Trafford has us on the back foot for the second leg at home. As you can probably tell by now, Ruben Amorim is no longer managing this club. That said, thanks to a team effort in the second leg at home, we made Manchester United feel like every bit of the hot mess they have been since Jose Mourinho left them with a 2-0 victory in order to advance to the quarterfinals of the Champions League. Shortly after that win, UEFA showcased their dark sense of humor as we went from facing one Manchester to another, drawing Manchester City for the quarterfinals. Which meant that we once again will face a team still featuring the Norwegian cyborg one-winged angel of death himself, Erling Haaland. The first leg would be a Stade Geoffroy Guichard, and while we would keep Haaland from scoring goals against us on this one, he did contribute with an assist, and we end up taking a rare loss at home with Lucas Dawson's 88th minute goal being the only caveat of a 2-1 loss. Thus, we now have to go back to Manchester yet again this season. The Etihad would play host to us, as we had a mountain to climb against one of the world's elite. And Oscar Spitten Niesetter would meet the moment in question, scoring in the first 5 minutes of that match. Haaland responded to bring the aggregate back in Man City's favor with a goal in the 63rd minute via a Savinho assist on a corner kick. And yet, OSN would not allow himself to be denied as he scored his second of the match about 7 minutes later to make the aggregate 3-3. The first 90 minutes would not be enough, as this game would go to extra time, and yet again, the combo of Erling Haaland, Savinho, and set pieces would be the bane of our existence as Man City scored. 2-2 game, 4-3 on aggregate. But joke's on them, because I'd also been versed in the mid-2020s Arsenal dark arts, and thanks to Miguel Almeida soaring above everyone else, we found the equalizer in the 117th minute. 3-2 game, 4-4 aggregate, and we were going to penalty kicks. Those started off in the oddest way, as both Erling Haaland and Lucas Starsson would have their penalty attempts saved by Pisano and Donnarumma respectively. Bernardo Silva's attempt would also be saved by Pisano, and that opened the door for Sambi Lokonga to convert the first PK of the whole game, giving Saint-Étienne the advantage. Following the first two rounds, Savinho would convert for City, and Boaké would do the same for us, keeping the advantage. The fourth round would see both keepers step up, as Svare Nipan and João Ferreira's attempts would both be parried away to keep the score 2-1 for Saint-Étienne. On a must-make attempt, Rodri did manage to convert for Manchester City, and with it, That would bring up veteran Mikel Nade for the 5th attempt and our chance to seal the deal. In which he did, sending Donnarumma the other way and sending Saint-Étienne to the semifinals of the Champions League in dramatic fashion. Fun note, this game happened just before we beat Lyon in Ligue 1 to claim the title, so clearly we had momentum going during that time. So, who did we get in the semifinals?
Es un penal Real Madrid!
Oh, yeah, that checks out actually. Real Madrid's been a collective pain in our ass throughout these past few years anytime we've encountered them in the Champions League. With the first leg being played at the Santiago Bernabéu, we had a challenge in our hands, and even with Igor Miladinovic scoring the first goal of the match, Trent Alexander-Arnold scored the tying goal within 10 minutes after the fact, and eventually the dam broke as Jude Bellingham got a pass from Rodrigo and buried it in the back of the net. A 2-1 loss against an elite club like Real Madrid was better than previous results, but in a two-legged affair, it also meant we had a ton of work to do to turn it around in France. So, in a sold-out Stade Geoffroy Guichard, we went for it with plenty of shots on target, but somehow finding Thibaut Courtois in world-class form for most of the game. But in the 83rd minute, a counter-attack was sprung via Miguel Almeida interception, an Augustin Boaké pass, and Lucas Tasson having balls of absolute steel, flicking the ball over Courtois' head from the outside of the box for the first goal of the entire match to even up the aggregate. On stoppage time, what looked to be the game winner from Gesson got called back as an offside via VAR, and extra time didn't yield much after that. So once again, it was time for some more penalty kicks. Vinicius Jr. proceeded to treat his attempt like he was wearing a canary yellow shirt, and Alex Pizarro made the save. Miladinovic would give us the advantage by scoring his attempt shortly after. Brahim Diaz was Real Madrid's next taker, and while he didn't decide to Panenka this one like in the AFCON 2025 final, he still managed to somehow screw this up as Alex Pizarro made an incredible save in his attempt. Sambi Lokonga extended the advantage to 2-0, and even with Jude Bellingham along with Eder Militão being the two guys in that Real Madrid roster to figure out how to take penalty kicks, Tidiane Gomes would score our third attempt to keep the advantage, and then Maxime Bernouet would kick yet another decisive penalty kick for Saint-Étienne, sending the club to the Champions League final in Azerbaijan.
What in the actual
The last time Saint-Étienne was in this position, it was in the 1976 European Cup, where the boys went to Hampden Park in Scotland and lost 1-0 to Bayern Munich. Our opponent for this final, however, was a much different one in Newcastle United, who were looking for their second Champions League trophy in the last 3 years. Newcastle had certain familiar faces around from over the years, such as the likes of Bruno Guimarães, Joelinton, Nick Woltemade, and Anthony Gordon, but they also had a physical force at striker now with Samu Agehoa, in defensive stalwarts in Nico Schlotterbeck and Ilya Zabarny. But whether the moment was too big or if the boys were still reeling emotionally from the close loss to PSG in the Coupe de France final, it didn't change the reality that Samu Agehoa decided to have the game of his life, scoring in the first 5 minutes, getting a hat-trick by the end of the first half, and then a fourth goal for good measure. And I mean, sure, we managed to score 2 of them ourselves with Lucas Tasson and Owen Wilson getting involved. But at the end of the day, we had to watch as Newcastle United emerged victorious 4-2 and raised the Champions League trophy yet again, with their consortium and the Saudi regime gleefully watching in a skybox somewhere in the arena. We had a chance at a possible treble, which makes the 2 cup losses on back-to-back weekends that much more frustrating. Especially in Europe, where we have proven that we can give Europe's elite a fight without spending a ridiculous amount of money. But at the same time, finally ending PSG's streak of Ligue 1 titles does indicate that we're on the right path here, and alongside it, we also now have nearly 200 million euros in our finances to go, with a new consortium actually taking over the club after nearly a year plus of rumors surrounding it. It would mark a new era for Saint-Étienne, as I now set my sights on not only continuing to challenge for the Ligue 1 title, but to also challenge for the top of Europe itself. And with around 39 million euros in our transfer budget, I knew exactly where to start. Center-back Giovanni Leoni had been making a name for himself in Germany over the past few seasons as part of Bayer Leverkusen, and he'd come up on our scouting radar for the spring of 2030. So, as our first piece of business in the off-season, we paid out 28 million euros to Leverkusen in order to acquire his services and shore up our defense depth. On top of it all, we also reached out to Brighton Hove Albion defender Olivier Boscagli towards the end of his contract last season to bring him on board on a free transfer into the club. However, we do end up at an impasse on contract talks with some of our longtime veterans, such as Maxime Bernauer and Igor Miladinovic. Over the last season, they have become rotational players and more so appearing in cup games over being consistent starters. And in contract talks, they wanted important player status with their demands. In good conscience, with our younger players being more and more ready to break into the first team, I couldn't give them those deals, and thus, I chose to let them walk once their contracts expired, along Augustin Bourquet, Mikel Nade, and Christopher Janssens at the start of July.
So long, partner.
We also officially said goodbye to Gauthier Lassonnet, as the mandatory fee of 17.5 million euros was paid by Dinamo Zagreb to officially acquire him, along with moving Alex Freeman to Leicester City for 2.9 million euros, as I was dead set on having Eric Laramendi officially integrate into the first team at left back to pair up with Miguel Almeida, who had begun to get starts at right back last season. But in order to make up for Miladinovic's departure on both goal scoring and experience, we brought in Spaniard Cesar Gelabert on a free transfer before we kicked off the season with a 1-0 win, in which Gelabert scored on his debut for the club. Giovanni Leoni would also get in on the fun in the next game, scoring the only goal of a 1-0 win against Padi FC. Given that our Champions League games were approaching and due to me wanting some more depth at the forward position, I did pay 13 million to SK Rapid to bring in English midfielder Bobby Clark into the fold after our 2-1 win against RC Lens on their ground. We followed past the summer deadline without any other deals, as we drew against Guingamp in a boring 0-0 affair, and then managed a 1-0 win away at Nice before getting our Champions League fixtures for the calendar year, which would feature opening on the road against Tottenham Hotspur, home encounters against Viking FK, Galatasaray, Sporting CP in Barcelona, along with tough road matches in Germany against Bayern and Dortmund, along with an away fixture at Slavia Prague. Bobby Clark would start paying dividends from the jump here, as our away fixture at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium saw us snatching victory from the jaws of a draw, with Clark scoring the 96-minute winner to give us our first Champions League win of the season. We follow that performance with a dominant 3-1 win against Viking FK at home to go 2 for 2 in the competition, along with handling Ligue 1 games for the rest of the month without any losses to our name in a draw against Troyes and a decisive win over Marseille on the road. The new board of directors sensed we had something special cooking, to the point where they increased our transfer funds in early October for the upcoming window. Not that I necessarily needed it, but the notion was a welcome one, especially as we use October to dominate across Ligue 1 with Oscar Spitt and Nicetter really finding a nose for goal in our wins against Rennes, Angers, and our heated rivals in Lyon in a 5-2 thrashing of that miserable little club, and then Cesar Gelabert having a night to remember at Les Chaldons by scoring a hat-trick in our Champions League encounter against Galatasaray. No, I'm still not going to Besiktas. Please stop asking me. Anyway, November started with our Ligue 1 unbeaten streak being broken in a 1-0 loss to Nantes, We then rebounded back by smashing Sport Lisboa 4-0 in the Champions League with Guilherme grabbing a glorious brace. Next, we defeated our affiliate club in Clermont Foot, who'd made their way to Ligue 1 this year, but shortly after that game, Alex Pisano ended up sustaining a lower back stress fracture in practice that would keep him out until around the start of January. So, we would have to put one of our academy's best prospects in goalkeeper Thomas Rivière under trial by fire. And to his credit, he more than pulled his weight as draws against Toulouse, Bayern Munich in the Champions League, and Strasbourg followed before Rivière earned his first win as a professional keeper in grandiose fashion, as we took down Barcelona at home in our 6th Champions League game with a 3-goal salvo in the latter portions of the second half. By the end of December in the mid-season break in France, crucial wins over FC Metz on the road, a 3-1 win at home over Paris Saint-Germain had us holding on to first place in the Ligue 1 table, and a routing of RC Grasse started our Coupe de France campaign. As January arrived, it would also bring another challenge, as Alex Pisano, Keita Kosugi, and Kohei Nakagawa were set to represent the Japanese national team in the 2031 Asian Nations Cup. I let them go with my full blessing, as we definitely had a deep enough roster to hold down all 3 men's positions, and Rivière had been performing well on net so far. A close win over Lorient and a victorious clash against Paris Saint-Germain in yet another Trophée des Champions encounter that led to a 2-2 draw and a penalty kick showdown that went on for a total of 12 rounds, goalies included, before Rivière saved Vitinha's second penalty kick of the night were encouraging signs, especially since we would also be facing PSG in the upcoming 10th round of the Coupe de France. We also received and accepted an offer for Thun Cup minors from Al Hazm Saudi club for 15 million euros, as the Dutch veteran had taken more of an impact sub-role with the arrivals of Gillibert and Clark this season. And as a precaution for future injury situations at keeper, I reinvested some of that money by paying Fiorentina 5.5 million to bring in backup keeper Tommaso Marcinelli. After routing Monaco in Ligue 1, Marcinelli would get his debut in a Saint-Étienne kit as we headed to Paris. OSN and Gillibert scored the goals we needed, and we defeated PSG 3-1 to advance to the 11th round of the Coupe de France. We then wrap up the league stage of the Champions League by hammering Slavia Prague on the road. Although against Dortmund, we'd end up eating our first loss of the competition due to missed opportunities in a 2-1 loss. But by then, we'd already secured a round of 16 berth, so you take the good with the bad in these circumstances. By the time we approached the January transfer deadline window, we also ate a rare loss to mid-table side Guingamp, and Real Madrid apparently saw that as a window of opportunity to make an offer of 64 million euros for Eric Laramendi, which we declined. Then, they tried to up the ante by offering 77 million, and we also declined.
Go home! Please go home! Young Bucks!
We did make a sale during this window as well, as Tyrion Gomes was sold to Cordoba for 6.5 million euros. We then beat the ever-living daylights out of Nice, and agreed on a loan for Zurikov Davitashvili to get some more game time elsewhere at Sheffield Wednesday before the transfer deadline wrapped up. Thus, that led us into the 11th round of the Coupe de France, where we woke up and chose violence against Angers with a 5-0 beatdown at their own stadium to set up a quarter-final rematch against Toulouse, who had knocked us out in that exact round a few years ago. Ligue 1-wise, we beat Troyes 1-0 to start February, and that was around the time we got Kosugi, Pisano, and Nakagawa, who'd claimed the Asian Nations Cup MVP while leading Japan to the semifinals, back, and admittedly we did exactly what we set out to do at the start of the season in Ligue 1 by beating down just about everyone put in our path over the next 2 months, outside of frustrating draws against Lyon and Strasbourg. By the time we reached the end of April in the league with 3 games left, we had a 6-point advantage over Paris Saint-Germain in the standings. Go figure that when we played them to start the month of May, we ended up losing 1-0 to them at Parc des Princes. However, this isn't your Paris Saint-Germain from the last decade that kept curb-stomping French football into oblivion, as they would end up dropping points in the last 2 games while we managed to win 3-0 against Lorient and then hold on to a 0-0 draw against 4th place RC Lyon in order to secure our 2nd consecutive Ligue 1 title. That success was only amplified by our continued Coupe de France run, as we have managed to avenge our loss to Toulouse from our 3rd season in charge with a 2-0 victory, then having another quite epic encounter with Lyon in this cup in the semi-finals, as it ended up being a 2-2 affair before going to penalty kicks, where Alex Pisano made a crucial save on Thibault Land's attempt, and wonder kid Eric Laramendi sealed the deal to send us to the Coupe de France final, where we'd face off against 3rd-tier side Red Star FC, who had been making their own wonder run in the cup. Unfortunately, we did end up bullying Red Star considerably in that final after they held strong through the first half, as Nakagawa, Ngason, and Gelabert would end up scoring throughout the second half to give us the 3-0 win, and yet another Coupe de France to add to our trophy cabinet. With apologies to John Textor and his team's campaign to a meager 5th place finish this season, we yet again have to talk about Saint-Étienne's Champions League campaign. So we're going back to March, where the round of 16 draw put us up against Napoli. The first leg was played at Stadio Diego Armando Maradona, and we got caught flat-footed after initially taking the lead in the game, as Lorenzo Luca, Amine Adli, and Gangen Lee would score the goals that give Napoli the 3-1 victory and a huge advantage going into the second leg at Le Chaudron. Unfortunately for Napoli, up to this point, we had been completely unbeaten whenever we played at home. It would be much the same in the second leg, as Marius Stan put the team on his back to score 2 first-half goals to bring the aggregate back even, and help drag the game into extra time, where yet another Academy wonder kid in the making in George Myers got to shine by scoring in the 109th minute to make it 4-3 on the aggregate, and then an own goal from Lorenzo Amatucci basically sealed the deal to help us advance to the Champions League quarterfinals. It turned out that not selling Eric Laramendi was the right call the whole time, since we got matched up against Real Madrid in the Champions League quarterfinals, having the rotten luck of being drawn as the home team for the first leg. Now, we did continue our unbeaten streak at home, as a sole Oscar Spitten knee-setter goal would be enough in the second half to seal a tight but crucial 1-0 victory. So, it wouldn't be much of a surprise that with the second leg happening at the Estadio Santiago Bernabéu, that Real Madrid's fans and social media team would do their usual 90 minutes at the Santiago Bernabéu is a long time spiel.
Oh, scary! Oh, shiver my timbers! Shut up, man!
That made it even more satisfying when Lucas Dawson scored a crucial goal in the first 15 minutes of the game, and then our defenders, along with Alex Pisano, shut down the Spanish powerhouse offense, and thus, the Madridistas would have to go home without a European trophy this season. Thankfully for them, it's a short drive.
Hey guys, there was a blackout at my place, so I figured that...
This would set up the semi-finals against Tottenham Hotspur, who were attempting to repeat their own magical 2026-27 Champions League winning campaign. Spurs avenged their loss against us early in the year at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in a 2-1 victory, where they were dominant across all the statistics. But yet again, we would get a decisive second leg inside Stade Geoffroy Guichard, and within the first 10 minutes, Giovanni Leoni would even things up in the aggregate with a header off a perfectly placed corner kick. Christian Romero would then proceed to do the most Argentinian thing humanly possible by getting himself sent off with a dumb red card by the 29th minute mark, and we would capitalize on the advantage by yet again reminding Spurs of their North London rivals with another set-piece goal from Giovanni Leone's head. Now, to Spurs' credit, Xavi Simons scored an incredible long-range goal just before the end of the half to tie up the aggregate, even with being a man down. But in yet another clutch moment, Oscar Spitenisetter would find the turnaround with a goal in the 49th minute, and with it, we'd hang on to win the aggregate 4-3 and punch our ticket into our second straight Champions League final. It would be a very special final to boot in the fact that this season, it would be France hosting it at Stade de France. And also because it would be a rematch of last season's final against Newcastle United. Not too much a change from the Geordie side we faced last year, since seeing a few newer faces like Brahim Diaz and Johan Manzambi featuring heavily for them. But the venue did give us an advantage compared to last year in terms of our travel, and we'd likely be counting on a great chunk of our fans to boot. We were underdogs, sure, but this was a legitimate shot to win European silverware and to do it in our own backyard. Contrary to last season, we were far more prepared for the moment and began to show it through the early chances in the game until longtime striker Lucas Stassen drew first blood after a pass from Oscar Spitenisetter, who found them in the box and he capitalized. 1-0 Saint-Étienne. But we still had a long way to go, and Newcastle weren't the defending champions for nothing. By the 27th minute, they would spring a counter in which Brahim Diaz's pass found Nick Woltemade in the box, and he kicked in the tying goal shortly after. 1-1, game on. We kept upping the pressure with chances, but on Newcastle's side, Gregor Kobel would make some great saves to keep the game at 1-1 in the first half. It was much of the same story for the second half, as we used the home soil advantage to keep peppering Kobel and the Newcastle defense with shots, and our defense, along with Alex Pisano, stopped the few chances that Newcastle got. But by the end of 90 minutes in injury time, the score remained 1-1 and we headed to extra time. Chances would continue for both sides through the early portion of the first half of extra time, but a crucial mistake by Marius Stan in the midfield led to Brahim Diaz intercepting the pass and getting past the defense until reaching the box, where his shot was placed well enough to beat Alex Pisano. 2-1 Newcastle. We started to throw everything in the kitchen sink at them from this point on. We switched to a 4-1-4-1 at the start of the second half of extra time to push for the equalizer, but even as we got chances at the Newcastle net, the goal never came. For the second year in a row, we could only watch as Newcastle lifted the UEFA Champions League trophy. In this time, they celebrated that accomplishment on our home turf.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer.
It had been a more valiant attempt than last season's final, and we pushed the defending champions to the limit in Europe, on top of claiming every domestic trophy in the top tier of French football. We had the caveats of also seeing Giovanni Leone flourish as a defender to where he was placed in the Dream Team 11 of the Champions League season. At Saint-Étienne, we had begun to build something special these last few seasons. All we needed was just one final push to get us over the hump and to do what no French team since the 2024-25 Paris Saint-Germain side has done: winning a European trophy while dominating your own backyard. The start of the year was very interesting, as I was approached to interview for the now vacant Paris Saint-Germain manager position. The Qataris, apparently, were sick and tired of losing to me at this point and wanted their way out of it.
Nah, I'm good.
Besides, I'm pretty sure our club was now richer than theirs without the need for a sugar daddy to inject funds in. Speaking of which, after years of keeping our finances humbled and just building a giant war chest through our competition earnings, I decided this was going to be the season in which I was comfortable enough to finally spend some of that money, especially with the transfer budget that we had. At the same time, those expenditures had to be smart ones, and it all started with making a move to purely spite John Textor, as we snagged one of the best Brazilian wonderkids available in attacking midfielder Glabio for a club record of 34.5 million euros from his other owned club at Botafogo, who accepted our bid over signing an extension with Botafogo or going to their multi-club partner in Lyon. The best part of it all was that Glabio had dual citizenship with Germany, so he wouldn't even count as a non-EU registration spot for us. We were not done just yet during the summer window, as I then negotiated with FC Schalke to bring in 20-year-old Belgian wonderkid Patern Kabamba for 16 million euros. Now, did I sign this man because Lucas Stasson's getting older and Bobby Clark is whining about not getting games as a starter? Yes. Did I specifically sign him because his last name is Kabamba and I wanted to do a Musterman FM like bit a song about him? Also yes. Hit the music. Kabamba, 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 Kababam, Kababam, Kabamba. Kababa Kabamba, he is a striker, a natural striker. I just wanted to prepare accordingly with these two signings while also having Kohei Nakagawa and Oscar Spitnisa sign new contracts to pay them handsomely and ensure their futures here at the club. After also starting new affiliate partnerships with Tenerife in Spain and Boavista in Portugal to start using the scouting nets and loan spots for our younger players, I ended up getting an offer from an English club that I could not refuse, as we sold goalkeeper Alex Pisano to Manchester City for 31.5 million euros. He had been a great servant at the club, but you don't just pass up a deal like that, especially when you can grab an equally skilled keeper with a higher ceiling in Alessandro Nuziante from Udinese for 7.5 million euros to compete against Martinelli for the starting spot moving forward. Additionally, we also finalized the sale of Albert Sambi Lokonga for 17.25 million euros to Nottingham Forest and Luca Robin to Atletico Pamplona for 3.9 million euros, as our sales recouped most of the transfer costs we paid for our 3 new additions to the club. The summer shakeups also meant we got to send Tomás Rivière to Valencia on loan to get some much needed experience, as he would be the homegrown keeper of the future here in a few years' time. Thus, with another alternate variation of the Ala Verde formation to capitalize on the positioning and strong foot of our newer players, we started the season off by going into Stade Orange Velodrome to beat up Marseille 4-2 just out of sheer spite for a certain someone still being there, as Glabio ended up scoring in his debut in the process too. We'd run that formation through the rest of the month in victories against FC Metz, a close encounter against RC Lyon, and a solid win against FC Nantes prior to the yearly announcement with the Champions League fixtures. There were some tough challenges ahead, especially in January with Arsenal and Man City, plus a rematch versus Napoli before that, but otherwise, we're far better prepared to handle European competition nowadays. This also brought us to the summer transfer window deadline, and while I rejected a 40.5 million euro offer for Jay Alvarado to RB Leipzig, I did accept a different one from Leverkusen for Keita Kosigi, as we sold him for 31.5 million euros due to him becoming more of our third left-back option over the course of this offseason. We reinvested some of that money into bringing in youngster Tim Bukvich from Austrian side LASK for 5 million euros, and we let Tim finish out the season with them on a loan back situation before this transfer window closed. Yet another win over our arch-rivals in Lyon followed to start September, and that led quite nicely into our first Champions League game of the season against Inter Milan, which ended up being a boring 0-0 draw.
That was a bit anticlimactic.
We made up for it with a full-fledged whooping of Lorient in Ligue 1 a few days later, and then ended up heading to Denmark, where we played a tough game against FC Copenhagen and came out of it with the 2-1 victory via a Miguel Almeida header. Then, after a comeback against PSG to keep us undefeated in Ligue 1 that was orchestrated by our youngsters in the starting 11, rumors began to surface that Manchester United was interested in acquiring Marius Stun for a ludicrous sum of money. Put a pin on that one, we're gonna be coming back to it later. For the rest of this first half of the season, we were recognized across news outlets as having one of the world's best youth development systems across the globe, along with maintaining our unbeaten ways in both Ligue 1 and the Champions League, with some of the highlights of that particular run being a 7-0 routing of Rennes that saw Lucas Tasson score a hat-trick, Paterno de Cabamba's statement game in Europe with a hat-trick against Bilbao. Also, our 9th round Coupe de France game saw us take out lower league side Plastique Valle FC, with Marius Stun scoring 4 of our 5 goals in that match before the mid-season break. Even with certain players like João Ferreira submitting formal transfer requests during the holidays, and German clubs starting to show interest in Luis Engels, I kept my cool as we approached the January window and worked out a loan deal to send Ferreira to Rhyme. Along with wanting to maintain this excellent run of form that we were on, I also wanted to bring in another capable center back to help shore up our depth for the deep Champions League run I wanted us to have this year. After we beat the pants off of Toulouse to start the year of our Lord 2031, Manchester United finally decided to make their move with a non-negotiable offer of 155 million euros for Marius Stun. Now, folks, that is a lot of money. A fuck ton of money, if you will. More money than I likely ever see in my lifetime for a single player, and truly, Marius had become worthy of such a high price tag over the past 2 years at the club. But as it turns out, according to his agent, Marius would be just as happy to stay here with the club if we decided to not accept the offer from the English side. And I sure as hell was not about to condemn one of the world's best young players to the absolute hellhole that is Old Trafford. Are you fucking kidding me? Have you seen what that club does to young players over the years? It'd be the equivalent of sending a lamb to the slaughter, and we stand this man too much to do that to him. The offer was, in fact, rejected.
Just lower your expectations, man. You're not a decent club anymore.
Right. So, the Trophée des Champions match was next on the docket, and Luis Engels only furthered the interest from Dortmund and RB Leipzig on him with his performance and sole goal, adding yet another one of those trophies on our cabinet, as we won 1-0 against PSG yet again. However, rather than accepting a contract offer after an initial transfer fee of 38 million was agreed on with the German sides, he opted to stick around and be the German army knife he's been in our lineups since his arrival. We were going to need all hands on deck, as we managed a KG 1-0 win over Marseille to gain a 12-point advantage over RC Lyon on the Ligue 1 table, casually strolled to a 4-0 victory in the 10th round of the Coupe de France against Limonest d'Adilly, and then traveled to North London, where Pep Guardiola's Arsenal handed us our first taste of defeat throughout all competitions this year in the Champions League, as Louis Openda and Nico Paz would score for the Gunners. We did rebound with a tough but earned victory over Manchester City in the following week, with Kabamba scoring the only goal of the matchup to ensure a third-place finish in the league phase and the round of 16 berth that came with it. However, Kohei Nakagawa would be out for around a month due to sprained knee ligaments sustained in the Manchester City game, which, in return, I decided to take that bit of frustration out on our favorite punching bags in Olympique Lyonnais once more as we defeated them 3-1 with Lucas Tasson grabbing a brace. Also, after searching for months, I finally managed to come to terms on an offer to bring in centre-back Ryan Flamingo from the hellhole that is Manchester United to our side, paying them €36.5 million in order to acquire his services just before the January transfer deadline closed. I'm pretty sure they were still mad about the Mario Stun offer being rejected and that's why it cost so much, even if I cannot factually prove it. Either way, Ryan was a welcome addition to the club from the start, as his debut in the Coupe de France game against Monaco saw us completely shut them down in a 3-0 victory in their own block to advance to the quarterfinals against Reims. Within Ligue 1, a stoppage time winner against FC Lorient by Oscar Spitnisetter helped extend the points advantage on the table. A solid 3-1 victory over Paris Saint-Germain followed after that, and as we continued league play through the following months, the victories and draws kept on coming in droves against opponents from all areas of the league table, with our only loss in the domestic league coming from Strasbourg's hands on their ground in mid-March. By mid-April, after a 5-2 thrashing of Paris FC, Saint-Étienne secured the Ligue 1 trophy for the third consecutive season, putting the club's overall count at 13 trophies, just 4 shy of Paris Saint-Germain's current mark. The Coupe de France followed a similar path of dominance as well. We took down Stade Reims comfortably at home with a 5-0 beatdown with Lucas Dawson getting a hat-trick, then got drawn up against Brest in the semifinals, which ended up being another full-fledged beatdown as we defeated them 7-0 at home, and then watched as Lyon screwed it up against Marseille on the other semifinal, thus leading us to face them in the Coupe de France final, rather than allowing me yet another opportunity to humiliate John Textor's club while winning another trophy. Marseille did give us a good match at Stade de France, but by the second half, Kohei Nakagawa and Glebu both managed to break through and score goals, and we yet again claimed yet another Coupe de France trophy to guarantee our second French treble between the two cups and the league title. But of course, it was the UEFA Champions League that we had been chasing throughout the whole season, and once more, we proved our mettle in Europe. For starters, the round of 16 match we ended up getting was Arsenal, surprisingly. While they had been the only side to beat us in European competition so far, they had struggled throughout it and only managed 15th place in the league stage. At the same time, they were now managed by a guy who does have a lot of experience in this stage. We had a much better outing during our second time around in North London, as we managed to keep things to a 0-0 draw at their stadium, with Nuziante being the star of the show with his clean sheet. In fact, the Strasbourg loss in Ligue 1 happened a few days after this first leg of the round of 16, so the boys were very much motivated for the return game at home. And that motivation led Nakagawa, Spitnisetter, and Stasson to score 4 goals in total to cook this bald fraud and his men alive in Le Chardon with a 4-0 victory to move on to the Champions League quarterfinals.
That's fine. I want to hurt myself, yeah.
We were drawn against Napoli for the quarterfinals, making this one a rematch of last season's round of 16 against the Italian side. Unlike last year, the first leg in Italy had a much better result for us, as Lucas Dawson yet again proved he still had the scoring touch with a brace to give us the 2-1 win and a huge advantage heading into France for the second leg. We would give Napoli no quarter, as even an early goal from their side wouldn't be enough to stop us from winning at 3-1, with Ryan Flamingo getting his first goal in a Saint-Étienne shirt during the process. The semifinals yet again would be another rematch from last season, as we would face Real Madrid once more. The Bernabeu would play host to the first leg, and while Oscar Spitnisetter scored early in the first half, Real Madrid would hang on and find a damn near miracle, with Trent Alexander-Arnold scoring in the 95th minute to equalize the aggregate in stoppage time. It was tough to give up a goal that late in the game, but this time around, Real Madrid would be coming into our house for the decisive second leg. It would be Miguel Almeida getting us ahead off set pieces in the 26th minute, then followed by Kabamba finding a header in the box to amplify the aggregate lead to 3-1 about 10 minutes later. Both sides had close attempts in the second half early on, as Real Madrid had a goal called back for offsides via VAR and eventually did find a means to score off of a Franco Mastantuono volley, in the 75th minute to bring it back within 1. Unfortunately for them, Luis Engo's decision to stick around with the club also led him to scoring Saint-Étienne's third and decisive goal of this aggregate. Not even a stoppage time goal by Vinicius Jr. would be enough to make up the difference. A 3-2 victory, a 4-3 aggregate win, and with it, we were headed back to the Champions League final for the third consecutive year. And so was Newcastle United.
Oh no, not these guys again!
Yes, the Saudi consortium machine residing in Northern England is hungry for more money and trophies after engineering a comeback against Bayern Munich. Portugal would play host to this year's final at Estádio da Luz and see the third straight Champions League final disputed by both clubs, which, okay, that's gotta be some sort of record, right? Right? Anyway, I knew what was at stake. You, yes, you, the person watching this right now, probably have a good understanding of what the stakes are by now too. It's either we go for broke here and break this curse of losing in the finals, or just fully admit that Newcastle is our daddy, and I'm certainly not ready for that kind of commitment in my life. So, after setting our opposition plans to try and maximize our pressure on their key players, we once again walked to that Champions League anthem in the drizzling, rainy afternoon in Lisbon. For our starting 11, Nunziante would guard the net, Flamingo and Gector were in the center-back pairing, Laramendi on the left, Almeida on the right. Then we had the double pivot defensive midfield combo on Luis Engels and Mario Stan. Up front, Glebie was set as the second striker in the attacking center, Nakagawa and Spitten Nisetter on the left and right wings respectively, and Kabamba was the striker up top. To the surprise of everyone in attendance, an incredible effort from Kohei Nakagawa and Eric Laramendi on the left side of the pitch saw Laramendi's pass find Nakagawa in the final third, who then crossed it into the box, and Oscar Spitten Nisetter made a timely run to beat the defender to the ball with his head and put it past Gregor Kolbo. 1-0 Saint-Étienne at the 2-minute mark. Euphoria was an understatement with such an early goal. But at the same time, scoring first didn't necessarily mean it'd win you the game. We learned that last season. Newcastle was quick to attempt to strike back, as our defense had to be on their toes with some of the close chances they got, and this is all within the first 10 minutes of the game to boot. Newcastle would continue the pressure through the first half on our final third, but defensively, we endured it to maintain the 1-0 lead going into halftime. The second half saw us initially start to attempt to extend our lead, but not quite finding the target in those early attempts. But at the same time, we also continued to defend well as Newcastle's attempts to find good quality shots on target were made non-existent. Chances came and went for both teams throughout the second half, but while Newcastle had the majority of those chances, none would find the marker, and their best attempt in stoppage time from Benjamin Šeško sailed wide of the net. Finally, the whistle would blow in the 93rd minute. The demons of 2 lost finals to the Geordies had been finally put to rest. In a defensive masterclass, Saint-Étienne held on to the 1-0 result, and with it, they have won the 2030-31 UEFA Champions League. It was the first European trophy that would be added to the cabinet, and one that we could be proud of, given that most of our roster were a combination of players who'd been here for multiple seasons, academy players featuring in the starting lineup, and newer roster additions being the X factor that led to this glorious day. In the course of 7 years, Saint-Étienne has gone from a fallen giant of French football to one of Europe's shiniest jewels in every aspect of the game. An achievement that we can be proud of, especially considering we never went past the 40 million euros mark for the purchase of a single player. To top it all off, Kohei Nakagawa grabbing the Young Player of the Season award for the Champions League, along with seeing 4 of our players in the Dream Team 11 of the competition, was an incredible sight to see. Also, hey, real quick, how are our rivals at Lyon and John Textor doing nowadays? Oh. Well, that's unfortunate that he isn't selling. At the same time, while this whole saga began as a means to spite a so-called American billionaire, I learned some key lessons through managing Saint-Étienne the last couple of seasons. Ambition and a little bit of spite can take you a long way, and success is the sweetest bit of comeuppance that you can have. So you know what? John Textor can stick around with his ownership of Lyon. We'll just keep making his life miserable and dominating France in the meantime. Bitch, you still exist? Ugh, fine. I guess we can go win that next season too. But that, my friends, will be a story for another time. I'm gonna go write about FIFA being a corrupt mess now. See you next time!